History is full of mistakes, but usually when we screw up, it takes a while for the disaster to happen. But on August 10th, in the year 1628, the Swedish Empire managed to humiliate itself in record time by sinking its own flagship less than 20 minutes after it set sail. Welcome to another episode of History Glitch, where we explore the moments humanity forgot to save its progress. Today, we are looking at the Vasa, the 17th century equivalent of the Titanic, but much stupider because while the Titanic hit an iceberg, the Vasa was taken down by a light breeze and the massive ego of a king. As Tom Phillips describes in his book, Humans, this is the ultimate example of why you should never let a boss design a project just because he is the boss. To understand this glitch, we have to go to Sweden during the 30 Years' War. The king was Gustavus Adolphus, also known as the Lion of the North, and he was a man in a hurry. He wanted to dominate the Baltic Sea and scare the living daylights out of the Polish and German navies, so he ordered the construction of the most powerful warship the world had ever seen. He named it the Vasa, after his own royal dynasty, which is a bit like naming a car after yourself, and then driving it immediately into a wall. The original plan was for a traditional ship, but King Gustavus was not a man of moderation. He kept changing the requirements while the ship was already being built. This is what we call feature creep in modern software development. But in the 1600s, it was just called doing whatever the king yelled about. The king heard that the Danish were building a ship with 2 gun decks, so he decided the Vasa had to have 2 gun decks as well. The shipbuilders were terrified. They knew that putting 2 rows of heavy bronze cannons on a ship that was designed for one would make it dangerously top-heavy. It is simple physics. If you put all the weight at the top of a floating object, it wants to flip over. But nobody wanted to tell the Lion of the North that his idea was terrible because kings in the 17th century had a nasty habit of executing people with bad news. So the shipbuilders just nodded and added the extra weight. They loaded the ship with 64 massive bronze cannons. To make matters worse, the king wanted the ship to be beautiful, so they added hundreds of heavy wooden sculptures to the upper hull. There were statues of Roman emperors, Greek gods, and biblical heroes, all painted in bright, gaudy colors. It was a floating art gallery, and all that heavy oak timber was sitting high above the waterline, further destabilizing the ship. The master shipbuilder Henrik Heibertson actually died a year before the ship was finished, which was probably a lucky career move for him, considering what was about to happen. His replacement, a man named Hein Jakobsen, realized the ship was unstable. In fact, they performed a stability test while the ship was still in the harbor. The test was very scientific for the time. They had 30 sailors run back and forth from one side of the deck to the other to see how much the ship would rock. After the men ran just 3 times, the ship started swaying so violently that the admiral in charge yelled at them to stop immediately because he was afraid the ship would capsize right there at the dock. Think about that for a second. The ship failed the most basic test of stability. It was obvious to everyone present that this thing was a death trap. But did they stop the launch? Did they tell the king? No. The king was away in Poland fighting a war, and he was sending angry letters demanding his ship immediately. The admiral, afraid of the king's wrath, simply ignored the test results and gave the order to launch. This is the classic bureaucratic glitch where following orders becomes more important than the laws of physics. On the morning of August 10th, the weather was perfect. The sky was blue and there was a very gentle breeze. All of Stockholm came out to watch. Foreign ambassadors were there to marvel at Sweden's power. The crew was allowed to bring their families along for the maiden voyage, so there were women and children on board. The gun ports were open to show off the shiny new cannons. The sails were unfurled. The Vasa began to move. It sailed proudly for about 1,300 meters. That is less than a mile. Then a small gust of wind, a breeze that wouldn't have ruffled a bird's feathers, hit the sails. The ship heeled over to port. Normally, a ship rights itself, but the Vasa was so top-heavy that it just kept leaning. Because the gun ports were open to show off the cannons, water started rushing in. In seconds, the pride of the Swedish Navy turned into a submarine. It sank in front of thousands of horrified spectators, just 120 meters from the shore. The masts were still sticking out. Of the water, 30 people dragged down by the heavy cannons, and the trapped hull drowned. The most expensive project in Swedish history had lasted roughly 20 minutes. The aftermath was a masterclass in the blame game. The king was furious and demanded an inquest. He wanted to know who had sabotaged his ship. The royal council interrogated the captain. The captain said he had followed orders. They interrogated the shipbuilders. The shipbuilders said they followed the king's approved dimensions. When asked why the ship was so narrow and unstable, the shipbuilder quietly pointed out that the king himself had approved the measurements. There was an awkward silence in the courtroom. Everyone realized the fault lay with the king, but you couldn't execute the king. So in the end, nobody was punished. The disaster was officially blamed on the will of God, which is the 17th century equivalent of saying a computer error caused the problem. The irony is that because the Vasa sank so quickly and sat in the cold, brackish water of the Baltic Sea, which protects wood from shipworms, it was perfectly preserved. When it was raised from the deep in 1961, it was 98% intact. Today, it is the most visited museum in Scandinavia. The king wanted to build a monument to his power, but instead, he built a monument to his own stupidity. It serves as a permanent reminder that no matter how much money or authority you have, you cannot negotiate with gravity. The Vasa is the ultimate history glitch, a project that failed not because of a lack of skill, but because of a surplus of ego. It teaches us that when the boss demands something impossible and everyone is too afraid to say no, the result is usually a shipwreck. So the next time you feel bad about a mistake you made at work, just remember, at least you didn't sink the national budget in 20 minutes on a sunny afternoon.